Are you gonna help me look at the books? Or do you just want to get away? I'm here today to talk about the 5 books that changed me. I'm not going to have any sort of preamble or anything, I'm just going to get straight into it. So these are all books that have changed my life in one way or another. The first book that I'm going to talk about is this one, Matilda by Roald Dahl. Now this is a very different cover. I ordered this online, I just thought it was really pretty, and because Matilda means quite a lot to me, I wanted to have something a little bit special on my shelf. So I picked up this really pretty sort of classic style, and it's got gorgeous end papers, and I love this book. So Matilda by Roald Dahl, I'm sure you know the story of it, so I won't get into the whole thing, but Matilda was the first book that I ever read, and I was 7, maybe 8 when I first read Matilda, and we didn't have books at home. My parents aren't and weren't readers, and reading had never really been pushed to me as a sort of a thing. I did get a bedtime story, but I wasn't really I'd never really read many books. I was a kid who watched TV and Sesame Street and all that sort of thing, and one day I was forced to take a book out of the school library. So I picked Matilda and I went home and I went to my room and I sat down and I didn't move after school. I sat there until it was dark and I read Matilda from cover to cover. And Matilda was the book that got me in love with reading, and from there, from being 7 to 8 year old, I became obsessed with reading. I became Matilda. I took myself off down to the library by myself. I got myself a library card. I used to go in there, I used to take out the books, take them home, read them, go back and yeah, I just spent, especially my summers, I remember all of my summers as a kid were spent at the library, or sitting reading the books that I'd got from the library, and Matilda was the book that did that for me. And I always wonder, had I picked up a different book that wasn't for me, would I have discovered reading, or was it because it hit at the right time and Matilda sort of resonated with me? And so sometimes I wonder if the reason that I love books so much is because of Matilda, and for that reason it's very special to me and it changed my life. The next book that changed my life is this one, Everyday Sexism by Laura Bates. This book opened my eyes so much. I knew about sexism, or at least I thought I did, and I knew the sort of the general sort of stereotypical sexist comments such as get back to the kitchen and things that boys would tell you at school, but I didn't realise just how far sexism goes, and some things I didn't even realise was sexism. Once I read this book I realised that yeah, there is a lot of sexism in society, and I just hadn't realised it. And this book opened my eyes so much to what goes on around us. And it's not just sexism towards women, it's sexism towards men as well. There's so many elements of society that are just sort of deep-rooted in sexism that we don't even think about on a day-to-day basis. At least I didn't anyway, until I read this book. And the way it's put together is brilliant. It's got loads of testimonials from women and girls who've received sexism. It's got testimonials from men and boys who have received sexism. And I can't recommend this enough. I've talked about it a lot, and it changed my life. And so I really would love to know if any of you have read this, or if you're going to. The next book that I've got, I don't actually have a copy of anymore, which I'm devastated about. I did have a really nice hardback copy of it, but it's disappeared somewhere in amongst one of the moves that I've done. I've moved house quite a few times, and somewhere along the way it went missing. And that is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And the reason that that book spoke to me was because I mentioned before, I didn't come from sort of a reading background, and when I started picking up a lot of books and spending all my time at the library and just reading constantly, I became sort of a source of suspicion within my family. It was more expected that I would be outside playing football or running around and doing that sort of thing, and I was never a sporty child. I was the only one in my family who wasn't very sporty. I was absolutely atrocious at it, and I had no interest. I wanted to read. And so my reading became quite secretive, and I would often pretend I was off to play with a friend, and I would actually just be in the library by myself. And I would bring books home, take them upstairs, sneak them in, read them, return them, nobody knew. And the school that I went to was quite a rough school, and this was sort of in the 90s, and it was a school in quite a ran-down part of Newcastle. But then another teacher joined the school. He was sort of a young teacher, and he was very passionate, and he was very sort of desperate to try and push and educate the children that he'd come into the class with. He brought with him a bookshelf full of all these interesting and strange books that I'd never heard of before. And there was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, and I picked it up, I took it home, and it was met with sort of abstract horror from everybody at home. The general idea was that classics were not for our type of people. Classics were for posh people. And I have never subscribed to that. I've always thought you can be what you want to be. And I decided I was going to read this Pride and Prejudice. So there I was, 11 years old, in my garden with Pride and Prejudice. And yes, some of it was difficult to get through, and yes, some of it I didn't quite understand, but I persevered, I got through it. And for that reason, it changed my life, because I realised there and then that no matter what people say, or no matter where people tell you that you belong in life, that you can strive for what you want. And if you want to read a classic and you are living on a council estate in Newcastle and you think that classics aren't for you, classics can be for you, classics can be for everybody. And I enjoyed Pride and Prejudice, and unfortunately my copy is missing, but I will be buying a new copy when I find a pretty one. But yeah, Pride and Prejudice changed my life, who knew? The next book that I've got is an Enid Blyton book, and that is The Secret Island. Now, I can remember, again, childhood, which was when I was sort of discovering reading and discovering a different world to the one that I had. And The Secret Island is about a group of children who are living in less than ideal circumstances, and their parents are missing, and they're sort of living quite an abusive lifestyle, abusive in sort of Enid Blyton form, so sort of made to work the land. We're not talking about sort of being beaten and sold into slavery, but you know, abusive in Enid Blyton's way. And they decide amongst themselves that they're going to run away, and they're going to live on a secret island, and they're going to become self-sufficient and look after themselves. And they do. And this book to me opened up a whole world of possibilities to me, that if you want to escape the world that you're in, perhaps don't do it when you're 10 years old, but if you want to escape the world you're in, you can. And I became somewhat obsessed with the idea of upping and leaving one day, and I knew that one day I was going to fly off, as it were, and have my own adventure, and I did, I really did. And I thank this book for sort of igniting that passion in me from a very young age. For example, at one point in my late teens, I walked into a travel agent's with £150 in my pocket, walked up to the travel agent desk, said, "What have you got leaving, what can I take?" She said, "We've got a flight to Prague leaving in a few hours," which is like it was the next morning, but it was literally, it was less than 24 hours. She said, "I've got a flight to Prague leaving, you can go on that if you want." So I paid my money, and I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning, left the house, and I disappeared off to Prague by myself for a couple of days. In hindsight, I didn't really plan it too well. I didn't tell anybody where I was going, and it was only when I landed in Prague that I realised that I might have made an error in travelling to a foreign country and not telling anybody I'd left the country. That was a bit stupid, but I had an excellent adventure to myself for a couple of days. It was brilliant. It was scary at times. There was some... Well, that's a story for another day. That is a story that one day I might actually tell the story of when I disappeared off to Prague by myself, because... wow, some things went down, I'll tell you that. But again, I think it's this book that changed my life and made me realise that adventure was for me. The final book that I've got is a really grubby copy, because I picked it up secondhand on a whim, and this is Little Girl Lost. This is by Barbie Probert. Now, this is a true story about a girl who was, I think she was 4 years old. In 1945, she wasn't 4, she was 7. 7-year-old Barbie and her sister Eva were trapped, terrified, in war-torn Germany. With their father missing and hundreds of miles from their mother, news of the approaching army left them confronted with an impossible choice: to face invasion or to flee on foot. And they flee on foot. And this is just an epic tale, and prior to reading this book, I had never considered what life was like in World War II for the German side and for the ordinary German people. I had always sort of gone with the propaganda that we're taught at school, that the German soldiers, they were all baddies, the Germans, they were baddies, and that is the sort of thing that was drummed down our throats at school. And then I read this, and it just opened my eyes to the propaganda that we'd been taught at school, and the ordinary German person was just exactly the same as us. They're the same sort of people. They didn't want the war either. And a huge proportion of the German soldiers, they were all just normal men, just like our men. And I think this book just opened up so much to me, and it was brilliant. And since then, I've had a bit of a World War II obsession, and I've wanted to read things from the other side, from how the Germans found it, and I've watched documentaries, and I really enjoyed The Women of the Castle a little while ago, which is sort of a fictional account of some women of the opposition in Germany and their different lives and how they intertwine. And Also, I should mention, I also lived in Germany for a short period of time, about 2 years. And I just think that if you've never sort of thought about what it was like being in World War II from the opposite side, you really should read this, because it opened my eyes, and it's a brilliant read. It's a memoir, it's true. And just the journey that this girl and her sister went on, two very brave little girls, and amazing, absolutely amazing. So yeah, that's the last book that I've got in my pile. So as usual, let me know if you've read any of them, and let me know if you're going to, or let me know which books changed your life, because I would really like to know, because I think it's a very individual thing, isn't it? So I'm off now, and I'll speak to you all soon. Bye for now.